Get in on the action this season with Underdog's Pick'em game. Select higher or lower between 2 and 8 players and compete for up to 325 times your entry. Use code DIRECTOR when signing up to receive up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free pick. Yo to Bowl fam, it's the Director. Chargers fan, Super Bowl weekend rounding to the corner right now. And you know it's also rounding the corner even more rumor speculation about how the Chargers are diving into the offseason. We got some T. Higgins sighting in California. What could that mean? I don't know. We're not tampering over here. Maybe he's checking out some properties for a potential move. We have to wait and see what's going on with that. But then we get hit with this bomb yesterday. Myles Garrett wants out of Cleveland. This is shortly after their GM said he is not going to be traded. There's no way we're going to be trading Myles Garrett. And then Myles Garrett comes out and says, hey, I want a shot at a championship. And I want to do everything I can to make that happen. And if that means moving, that means moving. And Myles Garrett, now available, needs to be a position or needs to be a player that the Chargers are on the phones trying to negotiate for. Then shortly after that, we got news that Kupp, in a similar situation, is also going to be moved. He is very closely linked to the Chargers. Of course, being the other LA team would be very convenient to just drive in a different direction to go train with the Chargers instead of the Rams. But you know what? This is another move that fans are mulling over and trying to figure out if it's the right thing. We're going to go over all the speculation, all the reason as to why or why not. The Chargers can go in either one of these directions. Now, before we do kick things off, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog. You guys get ready for the big game, man. This is the way to do it. Use code DIRECTOR to receive up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Newcomers, please take advantage of the Travis Kelce free pick. And for the big game, and the big game only, we got this new no sweat token that you guys can capitalize on. It's a great way to support my platform, have some fun along the way, and get that one last lick of NFL football before the dreaded offseason begins. Before we do kick off, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. Small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification. Helps me out a lot. Let's get into the Myles Garrett Cooper Kupp episode. Lights, camera, action.
Who's got it better than us?
Myles Garrett and Cooper Kupp to the Los Angeles Chargers. Stranger things have happened. Now, before we dive into that, just a quick announcement here. I am moving. We're in the midst of moving. We got a couple of weeks as we're going to be shifting things over to a new house. Would very much so appreciate your guys' patience as maybe the videos slow down a bit. This will be one of just a few more videos you'll see with this particular setup as I get my new studio set up and arranged for at the new place. So bear with me if the videos slow down a little bit, but we will be here for the Super Bowl coverage in terms of Bleacher Report and all that kind of stuff, and then into next week as well. So we'll see a few more videos with this setup, and then we'll get all set up at the new place very shortly so we can rock and roll. Now, Myles Garrett, if you guys didn't hear, like we said at the top, Myles Garrett wants out. He wants a chance to compete for a Super Bowl, which is very fair, right? Myles Garrett, a very, very respected name in Cleveland, has done wonders with this team. He's been absolutely one of the best at the position for very many years now. It's been, again, according to very many people, very close between him and TJ Watt as to who's the best edge rusher in football. And it's for very good reason, man. He's been a game disruptor. He's been a very consistent, that's probably the best word to describe Myles Garrett, a very consistent disruptor at the position for his entire career. And if he's on the move, I guarantee you every single team in the NFL is going to want a slice of Myles Garrett on their roster. The big question is, where is he going? Because this is one of those situations where you've got such respect for the player, a good relationship with the player, and an empathetic view of what you want, for the player, that I think the Browns are going to work with him. Try and figure out a place that he wants to go and just kind of make it happen, right? And that trims the list down pretty significantly, right? You're going to have a good number of teams that, for one, didn't make the postseason last year. I think that's pretty safe to say. He's not going to want to go to one of those destinations. And then just honestly, personal preferences to, who's willing to give up the most while also giving him the balance that he desires in terms of actual Super Bowl contention. Of course, his involvement is going to raise that bar dramatically for whatever destination he ends up at. He knows that. And that does put the Chargers on a very short list of teams that would be a great destination for Myles Garrett to go out and compete for that ring, while also getting paid. Because, of course, this is his career. He's in the final, we'll say, maybe contract or two opportunities for his career. He wants to make sure that he is, getting paid his due. And there's, again, another trimming of the list. How many teams that are contending for Super Bowls have the kind of money the Chargers have? Not very many. Now, on the Chargers side of things, you got to be very excited if you see a name like Myles Garrett enter the trade market, because this is a position that your Los Angeles Chargers worship. The Chargers very evidently, over the last, I'll say 5 or 6 years, really want to get that edge position sorted, be one of the best in football. And of course, that vision hasn't quite lived up to our expectation as fans. It doesn't, wipe away the fact that it reflects very well on what the team's perspective is on the position. Going and getting Khalil Mack, man, that was a huge trade for this team. It's a very, unhistoric move for the Chargers franchise. You just don't see stuff like that very often for the Bolts. And I think this is probably the more convincing argument for me, at least, that the Chargers value the position, is that even more so, they nailed the pick with Tuli Tuipulotu. He's going to be an awesome future piece for this team. And then doubled down and went and got Bud Dupree last season, just really proving to me how much this new defense under Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter are throwing down and doubling down on the position, because I really feel it all starts there. The Chargers, who were the number one scoring defense in football last year, were really leaning in on the idea of a consistent, fresh, and lethal pass rush. And for the most part, they accomplished that. I expected a little bit more. I think they ended up being the 6th best team in terms of pressure and sacks. I expected a top 3 performance. That didn't happen. But you know what? They were definitely successful in their endeavors to make sure that that position was consistent, that it was producing, and it helped lead the team to some very impressive statistics defensively over the course of the 2024 season. Now is the time to start readjusting, seeing what worked in the defense, seeing what they want to double down yet again on, and I feel like edge is certainly going to be that position once again. Now, on the surface, you got some movement happening all of a sudden, right? Joey Bosa, who has struggled to stay healthy the past several seasons, may be on the move. It feels like a very appropriate financial decision to get Joey Bosa to a new destination, get rid of a large chunk of that cap, which is, arranged a certain way that benefits the Chargers, and open up a position for someone else to step in. Likewise, Khalil Mack was on a career or a contract year. He would need an extension with the team if he were to stay with the Chargers. My guess is that they do try and work something out with Khalil Mack, but that Joey Bosa may be on the move. And that, again, opens up the door for need at the position of edge, a position that the Chargers historically and, more importantly, recently have really doubled down on, reflecting the importance of the position for what they want in terms of identity on defense. There's some vacancies. And what better way to fill those vacancies than with a living legend in the NFL currently in Myles Garrett? Like, honestly, this dude is absolutely cracked out of his brains, man. Like I said a couple of minutes ago, the best way I would describe Myles Garrett is the embodiment of consistency. Since drafted, this man has logged, starting this season, over 100 sacks in his career. That's a huge accomplishment. But then take a look at the consistencies, man. 13 and a half, 10, 12, and then starting 2021, man, 16, 16, 14, 14. Not to, mention the forced fumbles, 4, 3, 2, 4, 2. Yeah, I like those numbers. You guys remember playing against the Cleveland Browns this last season? Of course, that game the Chargers were able to handle. The one thing that was difficult, though, you guys remember, Myles Garrett got 3 sacks on back-to-back-to-back plays, something ridiculous like that in that game. And it just shows that, this guy isn't slowing down anytime soon. He reflects very much so the longevity in terms of career, like a guy in Khalil Mack that we're seeing have some insane seasons in his twilight years with the Chargers. Very special player. No one would ever argue against that. Myles Garrett, although he is 29 right now, going into his age 30 season, is going to be a very big presence at the edge position for many years. I would say you're probably good until 34 or 35 years old. Currently, what the Chargers are kind of looking like with Khalil Mack, that we want an extension with, he's just that kind of monster and beast at the position, man. And it's something that the Chargers very much so, I have to imagine, are going to be extremely interested in going forward, because if we can get anything close to this kind of consistency for the next 3 or 4 seasons, they got to be, watering at the mouth right now, hoping that they can take a Joey Bosa size vacancy and problem and fill it with the Myles Garrett sort of presence. It's big. It's a big move, and unfortunately, it would make it a little bit more complicated in terms of can the Chargers pull it off, because it would be a big move, and he is that big of a player and name in the league. This is where the complications start to arise just a little bit. Can the Chargers pull this off financially? We'll start there, okay? And the answer to that question is yes. The Chargers are going to be among one of the more cap flush teams in the NFL. At very minimum, you're going to see them in the range of like $60 million of effective cap space if they do cut Joey Bosa. And it could be even more than that. In terms of actual cap space, you might even see him reach the $100 million mark at some point, before you start, nickel and diming. Okay, they're going to need a Rashawn Slater contract, and they're going to have to sign, X amount of players and this and that. Either way, the Chargers are going to be in one of the best financial positions for the next couple of seasons. Starting this year, we have the money to do so. But what kind of money are we talking when absorbing a contract to the likes of a Myles Garrett? It's a question I've been getting a lot the last couple of days. Well, Myles Garrett right now actually has a pretty reasonable contract up until the void season, which is a little bit of a concern. But you have to imagine that if he wants to go somewhere where he's going to contend, that he'd be willing to work with them in terms of restructuring and keeping him on the roster an extra season or two. All right, so as of right now, if he were to be traded, let's go ahead and say trade pre-June, you're looking at something pretty reasonable here, right? And again, a lot of this dead money stuff, you're got to imagine it's going to be negotiated pretty heavily with the new team, and absorbing some of that money, et cetera, et cetera. But as of today, you got $20 million on the books in 2025, $20 million in 2026, and a void season. This is the big one. I don't know quite how this works. $40 million in 2027. Again, I have to imagine there's going to be some reworks done with the contract to make sure everybody is happy. Okay. In terms of realistically where I see the contract going from here, let's say the Chargers do make the move. We grab Myles Garrett. Everybody's excited. Yippee-ki-yay. We're all stoked to see the position flourish for the next couple of seasons. How much do I expect Myles Garrett to make with his new team? Honestly, I would say it's probably in the range of $28 million, very close to the over the cap valuation over here per season for the next 4 years or so. So if the Chargers were to extend him or were to rework that contract, I would have to imagine that they would keep him under contract from 2025 to 2026, 2028, I should say, at the very least, making sure that he makes an average of $28 million a season, keeping him happy financially and keeping him on the roster for at least 4 seasons with the Bolts. I think that would make everybody pretty cool, pretty happy. All right, and that would be my expectation. The real cost, though, because the Chargers, and I think all its fans, we understand the financial situation we're in this year. It's very good. I think the cost that everyone is more concerned about is certainly going to come in the form of draft capital, okay? The Chargers absolutely nailed the most recent draft under, and the first draft for the Chargers under Joe Ortiz, the new Chargers GM. This is one of the best drafts I can remember in recent memory. I don't know about you guys. I mean, we got so many starters out of that draft. In Ladd McConkey, of course, Joe Alt. You got hidden talent guys like Junior Colson, but then you got guys like the mid-round corners. And Cam Hart and Tarheeb Still, and there's potential guys like, Kamani Vidal and Rice, and there's a whole lot going on from this last draft class that you're thinking to yourself, man, I want as many picks as we can get, because if we're already hitting this hard with the draft that we just most recently had, the very first draft and the only draft under Ortiz, just imagine the possibilities going forward. And so I think a lot of Chargers fans not too stoked about the idea of giving up a whole lot of draft capital right now due to the potential of, hitting again in 2025. Now, here's the thing, though. We also have to recognize, as great as Ortiz's drafting was, last season's draft class was pretty special. I feel like there's a lot of big players that are going to solidify their reputation and their presence in the league for a long time that came from the 2024 draft class. They were awesome. This draft class, I would say, is more or less average, maybe even a little bit below average. And we may not see as many huge names come out of it. Of course, you're going to see at the top, Ashton Genty and Travis Hunter and all these guys. But outside of that, there could be some potential, but definitely not as hard-hitting as it was last year. And maybe the Chargers see that as an opportunity to say, hey, if we're picking at 22 and there's, maybe the shot that some of our guys aren't there, Ashton Genty's not there, maybe Tyler Warren's not there, maybe even Colston Loveland is not there. Maybe we do mitigate our risk a little bit by getting a superstar player with that first round pick and then some, and then just bypass that altogether. Because, that's what you would be giving up essentially for the Chargers if you were, at terms, bargaining your first round pick this year. You would be giving up something like a Colston Loveland or players in that range. And you have to ask yourself, the risk reward here. Do you want to roll the dice and hope one of your guys makes it to you, or do you want to use it as capital, or I should say as a bargaining chip to get a guy like Myles Garrett? Because that's, at minimum, in my opinion, what it's going to cost, at least a first round pick this year, if not more. Now, in order to guesstimate, right, what this is actually going to cost, we're going to use an example very familiar to the Chargers here, and there's two sides to the coin with this example. We are going to use the Khalil Mack comparison to try and guess how much it would cost to get Myles Garrett on the Chargers roster. Now, the first scenario is kind of scary. This is when the Bears acquired Mack from the Raiders. And if you guys remember back in 2018, there was a very similar situation going on here. Khalil Mack was, a league beast running through teams in 2018 at the time, and he was disgruntled, seeking a trade because he wanted more help on defense, and the Raiders weren't spending on defense or pushing all their money on offense, and he wanted a contract and he wanted help, and it just wasn't happening. And this led to a blockbuster trade where the Bears would give up a huge haul of picks, a king's ransom they call in these parts, right? And that is something that you see every once in a while, but for the most part, maybe not work out for the team going and getting that one player, right? It's pretty risky. It is pretty risky. And the Bears, with as much production they got out of Mack was still consistent and great. It did not push them any closer to a championship caliber roster, just because they had so much work that they had to do. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, how much did the Bears give up to get Khalil Mack on the roster? The Bears would send over 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and a 6th-round pick for Khalil Mack. 2 firsts, a second, or I should say 2 firsts, a third, a 6 for Khalil Mack. That's a lot. That's a lot to give up for Khalil Mack, who at the time was 27 years old, I think. So in his defense, he was younger than Myles Garrett. They would get Khalil Mack a 2nd-round pick in return. They did get a little bit of kickback and a conditional 5th. Massive trade. I remember that trade. I remember rejoicing as a Chargers fan, not having to worry about Khalil Mack on the Raiders. It was a big day. It was a big day. But that comparison, I'll be honest, man, it's one that you're going to see on Twitter a lot. It's one you're going to see on Instagram a lot. I know Adam Schefter posted this trade as a comparison as to what to expect from Myles Garrett. That comparison gives me a lot of pause for sure. Because, sure, I'm willing to send over a first, especially in this draft class, for Myles Garrett. That, to me, is worth it. But that sort of king's ransom where you're like 2 firsts and a third and all this kind of stuff, that is something that I'm not as interested in because, again, we have to weigh the risk-reward here. The Chargers need stuff to work with in the draft for Joe Ortiz to go out there and work his magic, right? And I don't want to give up 2 years worth of first round picks. That just seems a little bit too risky for, even Myles Garrett, who's a 29-year-old, superstar at this time. And maybe there's a team that's willing to pay and that's what they're going to end up doing. That scenario does give me a lot of pause. Okay. And maybe there's a world where I don't mind it as much and the Chargers find, a way to to mitigate all that, and we're all happy anyway. But that just, it gives me, again, a lot of pause as to, is that worth it? Is that something I would pull the trigger on? But then you got the other side of the coin, which is definitely more inviting, and it was the Chargers' turn to go trade for Khalil Mack, which worked out a lot better in terms of compensation. You guys will remember, this is a much different scenario. Later in 2022? Let's see. Actually, I have it listed here. Yeah, the Bears were in an obvious retool or rebuild mode, and they needed to make some big moves to free space and start over. That was in 2022, right? This is the point where the Bears, they're realizing they're very much so more than a Khalil Mack away from making this roster a contender. They're going to have to, shift some things around and rethink what they're doing a little bit. And this led to an awesome move by the Chargers to snag Pro Bowl talent Khalil Mack for a mere second-round pick and change. You guys remember that? I remember getting the news here. Everybody was going crazy on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere, man. It was a massive, massive day of rejoice for Chargers fans around the world. Khalil Mack was coming home, and the compensation really caught a lot of people off guard, man. It really did. It made a lot of sense after you took a step back and analyzed what they were doing, but, there were other factors at play here. His relationship with Staley, at the position, was certainly something that probably helped at the time. The Bears' position, in terms of what they were trying to accomplish and the money that they needed, all this kind of stuff really did help make it possible. And this is something that realistically could happen in the situation that the Browns are in with Myles Garrett. It really is. To the degree of a second round pick, I don't know, but I think it takes the pressure off of the team trading for Myles Garrett right now, and puts it more towards something a bit more reasonable, because, again, leverage is a big thing in this league when it comes to trades. You've seen some big monster superstar names moved for a lot less than what the Bears had to trade to get Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack to the Chargers is a great example of this, right? And in the situation with Cleveland, Garrett has leverage there as well. He's a highly regarded player in Cleveland. They're going to want to work with him. They're going to want to make sure that his request to go somewhere, win a Super Bowl is something that they can make happen. Because, again, his request isn't coming from a place of selfish financial gain like you see with a lot of these players that want to be on the move. Rather, an opportunity to pursue a Super Bowl championship. And that is something respectable that I think the Cleveland Browns are going to try and work with. And this is huge for the Chargers. Some people will scoff at the whole idea that we're Super Bowl contenders, but guys, we really are rising stars in that category. Big players already are flocking to LA. Harbaugh and his reputation, it's attracting stars. Garrett is going to be one of them. I promise you. I don't know if that's where he ends up, but I'm very sure that Myles Garrett is somewhere saying, okay, the Chargers are one of those teams that we need to consider. Because of Jim Harbaugh, the quick turnaround from a 5-win team to an 11-win team, a playoff berth. And of course, what Myles Garrett would do for this team's odds to get to the big game. He understands his value there as well. This all could lead to a trade closer to for what the Chargers got for Khalil Mack rather than what the Bears got for Khalil Mack. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? I think realistically, it's not going to be as expensive as what the Bears had to give up. Now, is it going to be a second-round pick like what we got Khalil Mack for? I don't think so. I think the situation's a little bit different there. I think even though Khalil Mack, or I should say Myles Garrett, is a little younger, I think it still takes a first-round pick for the Chargers this season, considering the strength of the draft class and all that kind of stuff, which, again, I'm very willing to do. But, again, I don't know if it's going to go as far as 2 first-round picks and a second or third or whatever, all the stuff that the Bears had to do to get Khalil Mack from the Raiders. But I'm very willing to talk turkey if it's a first round this year and some change, whether this year or next year. I would very much so trust, Ortiz to get a deal done that we all feel very comfortable with. It'd be awesome. And it's worth it. I think everybody who's maybe nervous about the idea of not having a first round pick this year and maybe some additional picks this year or next year, I'm going to tell you right now, this is the kind of move Super Bowl champion teams make. If it's not going to, leverage your future and completely ruin your draft for the next several years, if you can find a middle ground that works for both teams, and more in particular, in this case, the player, that's the kind of move Super Bowl teams make. Garrett would thrive on opposite end of Tuli Tuipulotu. Maybe we even still have Khalil Mack, which would keep this pass rush absolutely insane. This would create, one of the most massively scary by reputation and by production and result pass rushing teams in the NFL for years to come. Myles Garrett is an individual game wrecker when you put him in a situation like the Chargers could provide, where he's got help on the opposite side and very consistent help, from the rest of the defense. You're putting him in a really good situation to succeed. The move I 100% would make. Now, to lightly cap off the video, we also need to talk a little bit about Cooper Kupp, because yes, this is something I'm hearing a lot about as well. Cooper Kupp, another big name that is on the move. I think it's per his request, right? He's linked to the Chargers for very obvious reasons. We're a team that really desperately needs wide receiver help. Kupp is a huge name just across the street, same, stadium as the Chargers. It would make a lot of sense that the Chargers are the team that adopt his contract, get him on the roster, and immediately solve wide receiver problems for LA, the Chargers, right off the bat. There's a lot about it that makes sense. However, there's a lot of fans pausing at the idea for a couple of reasons, mainly due to injury. Okay, let's talk about it. The injury has caused a dip in production. And I'm not going to say dip in production per game, but dip in production per season, I think, is the big thing that fans are struggling with right now. Because Kupp has missed 18 games over the last 3 seasons due to various injuries, right? And in that time, over the last 3 years, he's played 33 games, so an average of 11, logging 2,259 yards, 17 touchdowns. That's an average of 68 yards and half a touchdown per game, which, again, that's not bad. He's still a good wide receiver. But the bad thing here that everyone's kind of like, hey, I'm pausing, I'm not quite sure about, is his average of 11 games per season. And in those seasons, 700 yards, 5.5 touchdowns. Is that the kind of game changer the Chargers are looking for to completely change the situation at the position of wide receiver? I don't think so. That doesn't carry much upside for a desperate Chargers team that needs a star, a true star at wide receiver 1 going forward. This is not a T. Higgins move. This is not a DK Metcalf move. This is not even a Chris Godwin move. This is a Band-Aid on a bullet wound move. And it would be one that comes at some cost, right? Again, it gets a little murky here because the team, LA, the Rams, have come out and said, hey, we'll eat a big chunk of it, right, in terms of cap. But this is still a 31-year-old wide receiver, as great as he is still currently playing, very much so in the same, I would say, breath as a Keenan Allen, right? Like, these guys are very consistent in the route running and their cans and all that kind of stuff. Like, he is still a very good wide receiver. Is this what we're looking for, though? I don't know. And the money, again, gets a little bit murky. Let's say we go trade pre-June. Contract currently set to make $29 million in 2025, $27 million in 2026. It's interesting. A trade, though, to be fair, would put him closer to, what is it here, like $12.5 million in 2025, and then closer to $20 million in 2026. That is much more palatable, and it gets even more palatable if the Rams are willing to eat a big chunk of that. I can see some interest from the Chargers if we're talking closer to this number up here. You see this, the OTC evaluation of closer to $7 million. If we can get closer to that, then maybe we're talking turkey here. Like, okay, Cooper Kupp can come in and massage the position of wide receiver a little bit, give us some help there. We'll just kind of see what happens. Seeing as the risk is so low, that is where I'm like, okay, let's talk a little bit, because Cooper Kupp's still a great player. Would fit that narrative a lot. Would I have Cooper Kupp over other guys that are a bit cheaper, like, let's say, Keenan Allen, bring him back? No, I would still rather Keenan Allen and these dudes, just because, again, the recent injuries and all that kind of stuff is a little bit scary. He is 31, under contract until 33. But, again, it's not something I completely shut down, just because, again, if you get me close to this number, then maybe we can talk. As for the compensation in terms of money, I'm not scared away from that at all. This is, again, one of those trades where the Rams are kind of honoring the desires of Cooper Kupp to go to a new team to try and contend. It would be a late pick, in my opinion. We're probably talking 5th or later, maybe not even from this season, to get Cooper Kupp on a new team. It's very much so a money move, a player request move, and one that I don't think would be too difficult to accomplish. Okay. To wrap up the video in a nice bow, what would I do with the rumors that are floating around right now? The Chargers, yes, connected by very many different articles and stuff as a legitimate destination for Myles Garrett and Cooper Kupp. What would I do? Cooper Kupp, again, I've made known, if it can be a late round pick and if we're averaging around $6 or $7 million a season, I would entertain it. But the real move I am absolutely making is Myles Garrett for a first round pick and change. If Myles Garrett and the asking price exceeds that, if it's 2 first-round picks and maybe even more, I'm probably out just because, again, you're probably getting a player for 4 or 5 seasons, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how the dust settles. But we also have to weigh the risk-reward of how good we know Ortiz is at drafting and what we'd be giving up for a couple of seasons if that were the case. And I don't know, but if there's any way we can get Myles Garrett on this team for 1 first-round pick and some extra compensation down the road or even this year, then I'm absolutely in. This is a great way to set your defense up for success for the immediate future and just to really kick butt on defense for a while. You guys let me know in the comment section below, what's the absolute most you're willing to part with to get Myles Garrett on this roster? Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you like what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. We'll see you next time. And as always, bolt up, stay frosty. Cannot wait to show you guys the new studio. It's going to be awesome.